So, welcome. It's wonderful to be here with you, really here, and that we can acknowledge, no matter where we are, in ourself, in place, in the world, that we are all here, always here. And in being here, we can recognize the same presence that creates each and every one of us, the same life in which we are existing. And even as we acknowledge this in a small and simple fashion, something changes within us. We begin to open again. We feel a settling, a calming in ourself. We feel the underlying calm of life. And instead of feeling so isolated and separate, we begin to recognize that we are actually always in life. We are all here together. The irony is that we spend so many of our moments trying to understand our self and existence by looking outside, by questioning each other, analysing each other, or forever obsessing over ourself as some separate individual. And yet, ever so simply, by bringing our attention back in, we begin to see ourselves and each other more clearly. We're able to have a more felt experience of the truth that actually we're not so separate. That we are not alone. That we are the one shared life. So, how is it then, as this one shared life, and by shared I mean connected, how is it then that we have ended up in such a magnificent mess? So much conflict. It might seem odd to call it a magnificent mess, but it's quite extraordinary, really, isn't it, if we consider what we feel, what we perceive, or what we believe to be ourself, how we see ourselves, how we see each other, how we see the world, and how we see what is happening in the world. And for sure we can all agree that here now today we are experiencing a profound degree of conflict, individually and collectively. And it's the extent of this conflict that is felt that is actually driving this groundswell of deeper inquiry. So the fact is, the more we suffer, the greater degree of suffering we feel, the deeper a degree of inquiry we come to. And this is a bit of a foolproof mechanism in existence. It kind of points to the truth of our nature over and over and over again. The reality that if we try to exist in opposition to our true nature, if we lose sight of our true nature, we generate an experience of such conflict that it is no longer bearable. It forces us into a transformation. It forces us into inquiry. It forces us to realign. You see, existence is as existence is. You are what you are. Nature is what it is. It has its own fundamental makeup, its own natural principles. And when we live contrary to those fundamental principles, when we fight the true nature of ourself, each other and existence, it becomes so discordant. We become so conflicted. The suffering becomes so great that we have no choice but to rearrange ourselves. So conflict is actually the tipping point of a rearrangement. It represents the moment that things can no longer continue to function under the same model. How then, as a human experience, did we get ourselves to a point of such extreme conflict? Are we, any one of us, different in this conflict? If we look closely, we understand that all conflict is the same. All conflict arises from the same fundamental core. It arises from the same one cause. Conflict does, however, have different symptoms. It's why we get lost in the stories, all the stories of the symptoms of conflict, because it's so unsettling and so disturbing. We're trying to make sense of it, but we lose sight of the root cause of it. We try to rearrange everything at an external level when actually the root cause is internal. So humanity is suffering the very same set of symptoms and conflict. We go from the root cause of that through 6 layers of conflict. Let's first consider really what conflict is. We know that it's a very disturbed state. We know that that disturbed state has reached such a critical mass within ourself and surrounding ourself that it's no longer tenable. Where does that come from? It comes from a process of change and tension. But it's not just that there's a process of change and tension, it's that actually we're resisting that process of change and tension. And why are we resisting this process of change and tension? Why is because we are rejecting ourselves as this. And why do we reject ourselves as this? Because we've forgotten ourselves. We're disconnected from our true nature, our true self. The tricky thing here is that there's actually 2 aspects to self. There is self, the all-being, the universal self, the eternal self, consciousness, or the logos, that which is transcendent of time and place, yet in which all time and place are occurring, are created and experienced. And then there's the self which is made manifest as an expression of this timelessness, the individual self, the unique vehicle of self, our little self. And so when we lose connection with our own inner being, our essential self, that one that is timeless, bigger than the little self, unfortunately we get lost in the little self and we become blindsided. We do not see existence as it truly is anymore. And that is because we disconnect from nature and life as a whole. So as long as we disconnect from our own innate being, our inner essence, and we project our sense of self externally, at the same time we disconnect from nature and each other. So if we trace back conflict, we can go all the way back to the roots of our human experience where we did experience greater connectedness and greater harmony within ourselves and with each other and life as a whole. And we can see that that relationship with our inner being and nature and the collective sustained a state of balance. Did it mean that we never experienced conflict? No. Did it mean that we were free of tension and growth and upheaval? No. But it did mean that we were able to move with that, grow with that in a way that continued to carry us through different cycles and stages, from baby to child to adolescent to adult to wise old person, and different stages and cycles of human culture, the cycles of nature, etc. Once we started to fixate on the individual self, and we were dispossessed, disconnected from nature and our spirit, we began to tread down this path, which, well, I don't know about tread, I think it's a very slippery slope. We've been sliding down it. And this slippery slope is one of a never-ending chase. There's always lack because of this disconnect. So the root cause of all conflict is this disconnect from our true self, and therefore the false relationship with our sense of self. It's not that the little self in its own right is wrong or false. It's a fundamental aspect of creation. It's that we have a false relationship with it, that we forget that it is transient. It cannot be something fixed. So in disconnecting from that which is the continuum, the ever constant, we begin to try to make this little self something fixed. Because actually when we disconnect from the ever-present self, the universe, the cosmos, spirit, we disconnect from the very fuel of life, the energy, the sustenance of life, that which truly nurtures us, that which is truly love. Why? Because it embraces, encompasses all things unconditionally. It does not reject or divide anything. It is all-inclusive. The little self, on the other hand, being distinct, sees itself as separate. So when the human began to give greater relevance to the little self, the individual, and feed this, the human began to give false authority to identifications. And in giving false authority to all these identifications, we started to build up all these conditions of fixed ideas, fixed stories, fixed patterns. We lost sight of how dynamic we are, that we are the whole balance of all forces, light and dark, creative and destructive. And in having lost connection with that which truly nurtures us, we feel a profound lack in ourself. There's such a deep loss in ourself, a loss of life force, a loss of connection within ourself and the cosmos, that we begin to seek ways of filling up that loss. And how do we do that? If we're already identified with a separate self, we seek out more separate pieces. We try to collect more pieces. And of course, that's an external quest. So we go from this root cause of disconnect into the first symptom, the disconnection with ourself and the cosmos, believing we are separate, which leads to false relating, false relationship with ourself and false relationship with each other. That leads to the next scale of conflicted symptom, which is dis-ease, a discomfort with ourself and with each other, because we are actually having a conflicted relationship with self, a false relationship with ourselves, because we're no longer seeing ourselves as we truly are. We no longer see life as it truly is. So we go from disconnect to false relating, conflicted relationship with self and other, actually seeing fixed, separate other, into dis-ease, emotional conflict and discomfort. And the more emotional conflict and discomfort we have, the more we try to compensate for that. And so that's where we've entered that slippery slope of trying to fill up a hole that can never be filled by material things. So we fall into the trap of materialism. From there, we begin to have the wrong relationship with the material realm, as in nature, and we become quite corrupt. We violate that relationship with form. We violate nature itself, and so we have conflict with the environment. And because we have conflict with the environment and our greater place of belonging, which is not just our own separate individual home, but actually our community, our whole environment, we end up in conflict as community. We end up in conflict as a global whole. That's where we are today. So the conflict we're seeing at a global scale begins at an individual level. It's not a political issue. It's actually an ideological issue. In fact, it's not even really truly an ideological issue. It is a cultural issue. In fact, it's not even just a cultural issue. It is an identification issue. And it's not just an identification issue, it is a perceptual issue. And it's not just a perceptual issue, it's a state issue. It has everything to do with our state. So if we want to find true resolution with ourself, let alone with each other and the world, we have to regain a true state of being. If we cannot regain a true state of beingness, realign ourselves with what is true, our true self, the nature of everything, the way it truly is, if we can't realign with that, we're not going to resolve our conflicts. We're not going to find resolution. In fact, we go about it by way of trying to create a false measure. Even, for example, spiritually, we think, well, everything's in so much conflict. I will take on all these ideologies of being a more peaceful person, a more compassionate person, and I will think positive thoughts and I will be all loving, when you're still in denial of your whole nature. You are still in denial of the fact that you are creative and destructive. You're still in denial of the fact that what you keep identifying with is impermanent and cannot be made fixed. You're still trying to make things fixed patterns. You're still trying to operate from fixed patterns, let alone the fact that these fixed patterns are based on divisive stories. Stories based in the idea and the perception and the state of separation. The state of separation is this. It's the mind. The mind is the creator of conflict. We cannot wish for resolution and to begin to create a greater sense of harmony and wellness with ourselves and each other as long as we live in this state, in the mind. The abode of peace and harmony is the heart. As humans, we need to learn to live from this again. That's a state. The state of love, the state of presence, the state of being in what we are, the state of being open to and with what we are, what truly is. And that means accepting, first and foremost, the things we hate and fear. That's what love does. Love says, come as you are. Come totally as you are. There is no need for you to pretend, to fake, to try to be anything other than what you are. Nature does not try to pretend or fake to be anything other than what it is. It is creative and it is destructive. So until we accept the impermanence of ourself and the destructive nature of ourself, we cannot take responsibility. We cannot move forward with a true understanding because we are fighting against it. We're fighting against ourselves and against our true nature. And as long as we fight against it, we're blind to it. As long as we're blind to it, we don't understand it. As long as we don't understand it, we can't bring consciousness through it. You know what resolution is? Resolution is a state of conscious integration. That's what resolution is. Resolution is, I'm just going to try and hop over all of those negative things. I'm going to try and run from them and create some utopian world. That's not resolution. Resolution is open our eyes. Resolution is self-realization. Resolution is seeing what we are and allowing ourselves to undergo this process of integration. We have to integrate all that we are. We have to integrate our little self with our whole self again. So that means the way forward with our society demands the attention of both these directions. One, the little self must be transformed, but it can no longer be done singularly or in isolation from the whole. It must be an inclusive experience. We must see that we're in this together. So as we reconnect to ourself, we open our eyes again to what we truly are. We begin to understand it. We begin to understand each other. Only then do we suspend our judgments and our hatred. Only then do we allow in everything as it is, instead of projecting onto everything what we think it should be or what we believe it to be. That is behind all our human conflicts. This perpetual mode of projecting all these fixed ideas onto ourselves and onto each other. They have to break down. They have to fall apart. We have to accept the inevitability that it's not going to feel comfortable. Tension is inevitable. Conflict is optional. It's not going to feel comfortable, but it is going to be liberating. Embracing that discomfort actually brings you a different form of peace and strength than you've ever known before. As long as you try to avoid the discomfort, ignore it, you don't have true peace or true strength. Consider a shaman. Consider a wise man. Where does their peace and strength come from? Consider a Buddha. Where does their peace and strength come from? Not from denying what is, but from embracing what is. That is the ultimate remedy for resolution that we're all looking for. And it begins with each and every one of us to see ourselves as we truly are. That's it. Just begin to see it and welcome it. So, here now, you are already in this journey. You are already in this inquiry. You are already in this quest to see yourself as you truly are, to see life as it truly is again. We are sharing that discovery together. So I'd like to open the way for us to share this conversation, for us to consider this journey together.